Hello, and welcome to this second webinar in a series to introduce educators to the new middle grades and high school teacher preparation standards for science in Michigan. I'm Darcy McMahon, Higher Education Consultant with MDE. Today I'm joined by an excellent team of science educators and teacher educators who were part of the stakeholder committee who revised these standards. In this session in particular, you'll hear from Amy Deller-Antio, who works as a secondary science curriculum lead for Ann Arbor Public Schools, where she supports in-service science teachers with curriculum, assessment, and instruction. And also from Holly Hero, who works as instructional materials and professional learning specialist at the National Science Teaching Association, along with teaching classes in the biology department at Macomb Community College and in the College of Education at Grand Valley State University. The purpose of today's webinar is to ensure that educator preparation providers build understanding of the faceted nature of the teacher preparation standards for science, for middle grades and high school, and the implications for programs. This work supports the MDE plan and vision set forth in the Michigan Top 10 Strategic Education Plan. This plan lays out a vision for every child in Michigan's public schools. As a refresher, the three facets of science teacher preparation include science teaching practices, core knowledge of teaching science, and guiding principles for science teaching. These three facets are identified as critical for well-prepared beginning science teachers. For this session, we are focusing on the guiding principles for teaching science facet. Here you can see the definitions of each facet. The science teaching practices are the what teachers do to teach science. The core knowledge facet is carefully aligned with the Next Generation Science Standards and Michigan Science Standards disciplinary core ideas, but with a deeper understanding of that particular content. It also includes the pedagogical content knowledge, the pedagogical knowledge, and understanding of students. Finally, the guiding principles are the how teachers are, or their way of being. They are intended to be a guiding framework for the thousands of decisions teachers will make every day in classrooms and with others. Here you find the 8 science teaching practices, the 6 domains of core knowledge, and the 5 guiding principles, each delineated.
So let's jump right in with guiding principles and the 5 elements therein. Imagine this scenario. If you've been in a classroom, it won't be difficult. Teachers are constantly making in-the-moment decisions in the context of really complex situations, just like this one, where one student excitedly shouts while another group is working to clarify questions, while another group is working with a piece of equipment that might be potentially hazardous and require close supervision, while another one has students gesturing to each other and maybe fervently asking questions. A teacher has to make a lot of decisions in this moment: what to prioritize, where to focus first, how to respond to the shouting. What's pre-service teachers and beginning teachers are often seeking right answers when making decisions and solving problems in situations like this. But there are rarely single correct answers that will apply in every situation. What's more important is developing a lens for understanding, analyzing the situation, and prioritizing attention to fully understand a given moment and its context. This type of lens can be a fruitful way to empower new teachers to make productive choices. You might ask, in addition to naming practice and core knowledge for teaching, why layer on this third facet of guiding principles? As we just stated, teaching is a sophisticated business. A teacher has to be able to enact teaching practices in a way that not only demonstrates depth of core knowledge, but the flexibility to use that knowledge in varied circumstances. Guiding principles, as we envision them, help teachers make these in-the-moment decisions. These principles allow candidates to develop a mindful lens for decision-making in a variety of situations that span the educational context to promote science and learning for all students. Problem solving in the context of core knowledge and core practices requires deep understanding of and capacity to reflect upon these important guiding principles so that they become habits of mind, automatic points of reflection, habits of mind and automatic points of reflection. NSTA puts forth in a published declaration for science teacher preparation, teacher candidates need to, quote, develop dispositions for effective science teaching, including a sense of responsibility to students and the community and dedication to the need to grow continually, end quote. Here are named some of the most essential principles that teachers will need to use and use flexibly in the complex business of science teaching in order to meet the needs of all learners. The first principle named is that science learning is for all students, not just accessible for those who plan to pursue a career in science, but also that there's a service to society in all students having an understanding of science as a tool for personal and societal knowledge building. Additionally, in order to arrive at the best explanations and solutions, science needs the presence and thinking of all. Teachers should reflect and recognize the historical and present ways that classroom culture may impede a full understanding of who does science and what science is. And they need to reflect on how this understanding or misunderstanding impacts engagement in our classrooms. Named in element C, teachers will benefit from understanding the value of diverse representation and the power it has for all students, not just those who may typically be marginalized. All students need windows into other worlds and other cultures to enhance their abilities to step through doors of effective and robust problem solving that takes into account the diverse needs and solutions of our full society. Teachers must develop an asset-based stance and truly believe that all students are able to engage with thinking and doing in science and attune themselves to the varied manifestations of that. They must consider instructional moves that elicit and make community wisdom visible. Ideally, teacher candidates will be aware of the powerful stance they'll have within school systems by simply ensuring opportunity in their very own classrooms for the robust type of science experience that will build tools and skills for sense making, and by advocating for that type of experience in all classrooms. To impact engagement, teachers need to interrupt the mentality of students as guests, maybe with less rightful presence, and teacher as host. An important step for situating student interests and questions is equally important as any other business of the classroom. Teachers must consider new roles for students and for teachers as co-learners in the work of science and problem solving. You may be wondering how these principles would play out and become integrated with teaching, practice, and knowledge. Here are a few ways we see these guiding principles shaping classroom practice and teacher thinking. In planning, teachers might develop the habit of regularly asking themselves some questions inherent in these principles. Daily or occasionally, they might ask, am I inviting and creating space for all students to bring home and community knowledge into the classroom? How am I ensuring it's valued? They might ask, how do routines in my classroom signal or not signal that everyone belongs? Am I intentionally providing representation of diverse communities and individuals? By consistently asking these questions, the questions of this nature, Developing habits of mind that come quickly to support decision-making. New teacher planning and lessons should show evidence of these habits of mind. Just as this guiding principle can be powerful in planning, it can also be supportive in other practices, like facilitating discussions. Questions one might ask during class discussions. Am I recognizing student contributions and reasoning that come in unexpected forms, tones, and content? Am I presuming there's value in this contribution that must be understood? Or how can I clarify and support the class in building upon what this student has offered? These are all questions that will help us ensure that we're thinking about our classroom as accessible and that science is for all. In designing assessments, okay, teachers might reflect on whether they are affording multiple avenues for students to demonstrate understanding, and consider whether they are actually gathering feedback from students about whether they see science as for them, and if they feel included in the business of the classroom. So those are ways that these might play out in that first element of Science for All. But the second element of this facet is that teachers should be guided by the tenets of the whole child framework, such that they understand the importance of students feeling healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. These tenets of the whole child framework can have specific implications in science, as well as broader teacher practice. Reflecting on this framework regularly will help teachers to keep science learning situated in the student's needs in any given moment, acknowledging that the needs will adjust from student to student and day to day. In looking at the whole child framework, there are named in these standards 4 science-specific principles for attending to the whole child framework. There are very precise ways in science that we need to attend to both physical and emotional safety. Considering, for example, considering how to create a supportive culture for risk-taking in the context of public reasoning is an important aspect of considering the whole child. Also, ensuring all children are challenged with excellent opportunities takes careful attention and differentiation. Here's a brief example of how this principle might play out. A teacher monitoring students might be thinking, this sense making is really challenging. I see them working hard and possibly getting frustrated. What support is needed for each of them? Would sentence stems help anyone engage? Would manipulatives or visuals help? Do I need to remind Jackson about his good idea from earlier in the class to prompt and encourage him? This group is almost there. What might the next question I can pose for them to help them go further? These are the types of questions a teacher might ask if they're reflecting on these important principles.
Having given a few detailed examples of how these might play out, we'll overview the next few guiding principles in brief. When making decisions about teaching and learning, so that includes assessment, instruction, and resources we might choose, we as science teachers need to ask the key question: what will best situate a student to perceive themselves as competent and impactful in constructing and evaluating knowledge? In essence, feeling competent doing science. As teachers plan, we need to be asking, how can I provide experiences that will support students' ability to feel effective in transferring their skills and knowledge for their own meaningful purposes? How can we make sure students can graduate as critical consumers of science? It's not a stretch to think that students are most likely to feel agency with doing science once they've actually done science and engaged as scientists do. That said, students really need to be consistently engaged in the practice of science and engineering for authentic purposes. So assessments need to situate students to succeed by contextualizing the transfer of knowledge in meaningful ways, rather than seeing science assessed as discrete and isolated bits without clear purpose that is related to the business of solving problems and constructing explanations. Teachers need to be cognizant of the impact of their instructional choices on students' sense of efficacy and how we might undermine this if we were to make choices that signal science is just memorizing ideas from a book. Another important element of building student identity as a scientist is to support students in feeling like an insider within the discipline. This means having familiarity with and the ability to communicate and think like a scientist. Being able to apprentice secondary students in the disciplinary tools of scientific work and communication means for themselves as teachers, grasping the way literacy skills are used to create, disseminate, and critique information in science. It's important for teachers to think about just how impactful it will be to support students in accessing and understanding the culture of a discipline by ensuring they have the capacity to communicate effectively within the discipline. Helping students to hone their reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills in the ways that scientists read, write, speak, and listen will impact their ability to participate in the business of science. And it will provide an important authenticity for students' literacy skills and literacy growth. We create a clear and present purpose by situating science in the space of explaining phenomena and solving problems. Teachers are most supportive when they help students surface how their existing knowledge about language can be leveraged as expertise in doing science. Lastly, there's a tight link between literacy in the sphere of science and the technology tools used to obtain, communicate, and evaluate information and evidence. Among other examples, knowing what technology can be used to gather, analyze, and interpret data is a critical part of evaluating and critiquing interpretations and arguments. Being proficient in all 8 science and engineering practices relies on reading, writing, speaking, and listening in science. Science teachers should be guided by the importance of developing discipline-specific technology tools in the context of developing discipline-specific literacy skills for the purpose of engaging in science practice. Lastly, teachers must make choices that prioritize the perspective that knowledge is built in, among, and in service of communities. Classrooms must act as supportive learning communities in which the risk-taking needed for pursuing science and public reasoning is supported. Students must also connect to the broader community of the school and beyond to find relevance and reason for the work they're engaging in. What's interesting and needs explaining? What problem exists and needs to be solved? These come from the community. And teachers need to recognize their own need for a community that sustains their growth and learning.
By weaving these guiding principles into the teacher preparation standards, the goal impact would be to ensure teachers understand the principles deeply enough to use them authentically and effectively and flexibly even in their practice, and along with other important knowledge needed to support day-to-day teaching decisions. Teacher candidates will start to clearly see how these principles can guide and impact their work. Certainly, these principles likely show up in some ways in many of your teacher prep programs, and the impact on your programs will be the ways that you creatively reinforce, model, and assess their use across various aspects of the program. In the end, the impact of weaving these principles into the standards will be a common view that these are just obvious descriptors of good, caring teaching and learning, part of the ways we do business as science teachers. And in the end, the impact will be determined by choices made using the expertise in your institutions. acknowledging that not all aspects of a candidate's preparation happen in education courses, and understanding that the best places to deeply understand science is in science courses. It's possible to envision a few ways that some of these principles are well situated to be intentionally developed in the context of science content courses. This is not a comprehensive discussion, but a few ideas to spur thought or affirm work that's already happening in your programs. Several of these principles rely on teacher candidates having a clear, intuitive understanding of the nature of science. There is no better place for developing this than in the context of science courses with scientists and science faculty. If teachers are to apprentice students in the ways of reading, writing, and speaking and listening that are inherent in science, explicit opportunity to practice reading, writing, speaking, and listening like scientists in their science coursework would be helpful. This could be as simple as ensuring opportunities to read and evaluate a journal article or interpret messy data in graphs. Even just having some conversation about what counts as good evidence in a particular arena of science could be helpful. To emphasize the community nature of knowledge building in science, teacher candidates could have the opportunity to investigate and co-construct knowledge in teams, just as scientists do. These opportunities could be as robust as small research projects, or simply involve students sense-making in small teams to interpret a graph or data relevant to a particular content. A final example is the principle of scientific agency. Teacher capacity to build scientific agency in K-12 students relies on them having a bit of scientific agency themselves and having some confidence in their view and ability to represent the nature of science. It would be helpful to provide any experiences in content courses that can develop an understanding of how science proceeds. This could be as simple as having students explore examples of how particular foundational ideas were historically developed, or looking at current research to discuss how it might contribute to advancing science knowledge. In doing so, teachers could come to understand the incremental nature and flexible process for building scientific knowledge. In the end, our science faculty are the experts who will lend great ideas for how to accomplish deepening teacher candidate understanding of some of these principles, and they'll best understand what courses might be well situated for doing so. But collaboration across providers in a program will be helpful in adjusting to and being able to actually foresee and carry out and have the impacts we're hoping these standards might have. Thanks for your interest in learning more about guiding principles. As a reminder, here are some key resources upon which the standards were developed, relied, and if you'd like to learn more. All these can be accessed in resource materials that partner this website or in the appendices of the standards documents.